Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session on data spaces as drivers of digital transformation in Europe. This session is organized by Thomas Hahn, President of BDVA and Chief Software Expert at Siemens, as well as by Flavio Fuart, Senior IT Expert at the Joseph Stefan Institute Ljubljana. I am Alexandra Garagiani. I will be your moderator for today. I'm head of technology transfer at the Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology and coordinator of European projects at the Leibniz University of Hanover. So in this session, we will discuss the development and deployment of data spaces across different sectors and interest groups, with the objective to explore recommendations that accelerate the deployment of data spaces in Europe. So without further ado, we have a rich discussion to go ahead in a very high-level panel. So I would like to give the floor to our first presenter for today, Matthias Kohm, who is expert in digitizing industries and policy officer at the European Commission and at the German Aerospace Center. Matthias will provide with us insights from the European Commission side and as well as the full landscape of data spaces. Matthias, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, and thanks to Alexandra for the introduction. I'm here not to convince you how important data and data spaces are. I think that's very obvious for the participants in the European Digital Big Data Value Forum. But I want to assure you that our commissioner also, of course, supports this ambition, and that we think these data spaces are transformative for different reasons. So on the one hand, of course, the more data you have to train your algorithms, the better they hopefully are. But it's also a matter of completing the picture you have of what's happening not only in your factory, but also maybe in your supply chain. And what we also see as a driver that supports this data space idea is the shift from a more cloud-based to a more edge-based approach, which means the data itself is distributed, and you need mechanisms to easily federate these distributed data lakes. And what we are doing here within DG Connect, we are focusing on data for business in the European data strategy. And one fundamental aspect here is pooling of data first within a sector. We start with sectorial data spaces, but from the beginning, we will also address these cross-sectoral interoperability aspects. And since this year, we also have the digital compass to measure where we are and to have some key indicators that show us how we move forward in that topic. And as I said, we think the right moment is now because we see a lot of projects already in this sphere. We see now that there are also converging guidelines on how to set up data spaces, and we also have already practical use cases that are on the verge to really deliver business impacts, and therefore it's the right time, and we want to use this momentum also to develop our common European data spaces. You see here the picture we had in the data strategy. And the good news is now that with the start of the Digital Europe, which happened 2 weeks ago, we are now really able to kickstart this off. And we also had some changes in the sectors that we want to address in the first step. We're talking now about steps we want to take with our work program that is now open. We will see further data spaces and other topics later on. But all this is our central Digital Europe program part in the topic artificial intelligence, because when we designed this program, we are still focused mainly on an AI strategy. Now we have the data strategy, but all these data-related aspects are under this pillar of artificial intelligence. And here, in this more detailed slide, you can see what's now really in the work program. You see on the left-hand side the list of data spaces that we will support, and in the middle you see the first calls that are now open, that will be open till 22nd of February. And with this calls, yes, as I said, we really want to push these embryonic data spaces that we already see good steps forward, and we also want to prepare the delivery of data spaces with some coordination and support actions. And we still have main sectors like mobility, manufacturing, agriculture, health, finance, and so on. But we also have now data spaces on skills and already preparatory action also for data space in tourism. So you see, we will address really lots of different topics, and we will also have measures to address these horizontal aspects, so that in the mid to long term, we will be able to interconnect these different data spaces, and at the end have what we then would call a European data space, one single integrated data space. And if you now wanted to prepare yourself, we already had some info days. Some have already passed. This slide is not absolutely to the point because this morning we also had an info day on the agricultural data space. Currently, nearly in parallel, starting at 2 o'clock, we will have an info day on the mobility data space, and you see the two other topics, smart cities and the digital health topic, will come also in the next days. So, as I said, we see the importance of this topic. We want to start with the sectoral approaches. We want to better understand the needs of the sectors before we then go in the next step into these more horizontal aspects. Yeah, I want to keep my presentation short. I was told with 6 to 8 minutes, so have more time for discussion, because I think it's relevant for this conference to really discuss with you what are the ways we should address this, and not so much inform on what are our policy measures about and where we want to go. So with that, I want to hand back to Alexandra, and yeah, look forward to the other presentations and the discussions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for the very insightful presentation, and also for sharing the European Commission's perspective. Please add your questions in the chat. At the end of the session, we'll be having a Q&A and answering your questions. So I would like to give the floor to Thomas Hahn, who in this case will represent Aspern Data Circle and share insights on how data enables green energy exchange at the Seestadt Aspern. Thomas, the floor is yours.
And many thanks, and hopefully my slide is visible and you can hear me. It's a pleasure for me to speak about an cross-domain data space with a let's say business case in the background, which is developed in Austria at Seestadt Aspern, as a part of a city, and with several partners. And today I'm speaking a little bit of one of the partners in this area. And for sure, I'm not from Austria, so apologies when I not explain completely the Seestadt Aspern, which I want to start with. Seestadt Aspern, only to give you a feeling, is I think the last 10 years area, let's say, built, and as you see, there are people's living shops. A plant is on site. You have grids. You have mobility, e-mobility topics. You have factories, like mentioned before. You have buildings, building technology, and so on. And this is somehow an area around 240 hectares, when I remember correctly, where you have, let's say, a big, let's say, a living lab for also where people living, and also, as I said before, real life happening. That's the reason why I mentioned some kind of living lab. But you can imagine rebuilding this, giving also the opportunity to make some labs on this, and some kind of concept proofs, or also business cases proofs in this area. There is also let's say, research institute from the CSTAT Aspern taking care of the different topics which are ongoing. So that's only to give you a brief topic, but nevertheless, I put it here also the link to the web page on the site. Now let's focus a little bit about what we are doing. As said before, behind the data space is some kind of also cross-domain data space. There is some kind of business case in the background, and when you're looking here, or better, the business case in the foreground, and the data space activity supporting the business case. You see on the left side the energy communities. Upper side, you see a building with a photovoltaic on the roof, and the lower side you see a plant, also with a photovoltaic systems on the roof. And the possibility is to have, let's say, between the residentials living on the area and the people who are driving the factories, for example, to make some kind of energy community. That's the one side, which is some kind of what I mentioned about legislative changes. And on the other side is also to connect different domains, which is specific for this use case, I have to tell you. And we have built up this use case here. You see it between buildings, people living in the buildings, and this factory. This is based, when going to the middle of the slide, on Gaia-X principles and technologies. I want not to dive in the details, but only to give you a feeling where you have on the bottom the infrastructure, the environment, and on the top you are building up the ecosystem, the data space ecosystems, or in this case, this energy use case. On the right side, and this is the abbreviation, we named it ECOMX. This is Aspern Energy Community. It's some kind of project together with other partners, as other companies are involved. Energy department is involved, but also DIO and other research institute. BDVA is involved also with its members, which are taking care about to drive this forward, and for sure based on the Gaia-X, and therefore Gaia-X is also some kind of this part of this project. And as you see here, we are building this on some kind of on-premise cloud data infrastructure solution in the city. The project is straight ahead. Starting point is, as said before, at CSTAT Aspern, you have the ground, the living lab. You have the energy communities, essentials, factories, as said before. And important for us, and also for all of us, is that we get data from different domains also to elaborate following this business case, to balance the business cases, to balance the energy, but I will come later with a slide. We have data from different domains, factories, buildings, you have the grids, as you can imagine. And what we want to do is really to demonstrate data cycles, this ECOMX use case in the energy communities asset. And this is a straight ahead way. We have done the concept work. When you're looking at the bottom of the slide, we have some kind of data infrastructure. Of course, we are working on this. And at the end, also to have some kind of demonstrator, and of course, the possibility to reuse this, at least in this environment, but for sure also learning out what is possible with this. What is the energy and what is the use case? As said, we have the residential sites, which you see here on the picture and on the middle column, to say, which typical the photovoltaic produce energy, which, because the people are maybe at work or somewhere else, are not used. So this can be used on the industrial side. When you're looking at the right side, and during the weekend when the people are more in their home and the factories are less, then you can use generated energy from the photovoltaic systems on top of the plants, as you see here, on the industrial plants, to put it again back. And to be honest, this is exactly the energy community is when you make a circle around the residential side with PV, the industrial side with PV. This is exactly what we are trying to achieve with this energy community, or where we can benefit out of this. So this is a use case, and as you can imagine, there are different parties, and I mentioned this before, involved inside the buildings operator, the industrial sites operator, you have the grid operator, you have the energy community, like mentioned before, and of course the data which we want to exchange between the different domains, as you see, are also somewhere else. This is, let's say, the setup, what we are doing. We will have some kind of example. I think more important is not to have this very sophisticated, don't ask me how many use cases, really to make this use case business oriented done, and really elaborate what is ongoing, what is possible, what is needed, what are the gaps, as you can imagine, because then you have to contact the apartments, the batteries, the grids, the photovoltaic, the residential area or the industrial area, and when the energy is needed or not needed, or produced and not needed, and to balance this. This is somehow the use case in behind, which will be active spring next year. And as you can imagine, key takeaways is really with the ECOMX use case that we have this kind of energy community based on different domains, business case oriented, what is have to be achieved with mutual benefit, as you can imagine, and for sure testing and improving and elaborating the data infrastructure based on the GAIA-X principle. That's all from my side, and many thanks for the short possibility to make these short presentations.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Very exciting to see this use case and data markets in the energy sector, which impacts our life quality directly. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our next presenter, Edward Carey, who is Vice President and Task Force Lead for Data Spaces at BBVA, besides being a professor at the Insight Center. So Edward will talk to us about the current state of development of the data space framework and the next steps. Edward, the floor is yours.
Sure. So I think it's been a fantastic description so far from Matthias. Has given us that very, very high level view of what a data space is, and giving us that real kind of big picture view of how potentially we can transform Europe using data spaces. And at the same time, Thomas has given us kind of a bottom-up view of how a data space could start to be manifested at that level. What I want to talk about here is just to set the scene for what a data space is and some of the challenges that we have, and why we're working in the Data Space Business Alliance on a framework to be able to support this. So when we look at what we talk about with data spaces, data sharing spaces, there's a lot of terms, there's a lot of discussion about what these are. We know that we have our data ecosystem that's out there. We've been developing it within Europe for the last almost decade at this state. And we see there's lots of complementary technologies or movements out there. So we have our data spaces, which we've mentioned before. We have development on data platforms, which are very much kind of focused on the technology that's required to be able to implement this, but also looking at the business opportunities that exist when you have multi-sided platforms for data and what can happen around that. We also have our data marketplaces, and data marketplaces are showing where the monetization can happen, where data can be exchanged and shared in trusted ways. And all of these concepts together are important and are part of our ecosystem. We also have different perspectives on the scale of which this works. So Matthias has given us that very, very big view of the world and how it can be transformative at a European level. But we also have examples, good examples of where companies have seen the potential that they have for data sharing inside their organization and have started to develop data platforms, data space-like infrastructures to be able to support their own operations. And I think people are probably very familiar with the Skywise example from Airbus, where Airbus have brought together all their partners across their supply chain, end to end, from the parts manufacturers for all of the parts of their planes, right down to the operators of their aircrafts, the airports, maintenance, etc. And they've brought them into a single data space, data platform to be able to exchange data, to be able to analyze and optimize their operations. And this is a really good example of where a single organization, because of the type of dominant part that it has in that supply chain end to end, can bring all together the different actors that are there. At the other extreme, within the same sector, we can also see that other data spaces could exist as well. So on a much smaller scale, I was involved in a project called Waternomics, where we actually developed a small scale data space for water and energy management in Linate Airport in Milan. And this is a very, very simple example of where you had different stakeholders, people that were working with the airport, suppliers, people who are renting shop space, people who are running restaurants, all using water and energy in a small community around the airport. And they identified that we can actually have a small data space here that allows us to exchange reasonably modest amounts of data when compared to the Skywise example and to the vision that Matthias has presented, but still sharing of data that actually gives value, that allows them to be able to understand how they're using energy, how they're using water, and to try to minimize that at the local level. So there's a broad scale of opportunities here. When we look at this, if you want to look at what does this mean from a data space, what is a data space? Well, we have a couple of challenges because we have different definitions, different interpretations of what a data space is. This is the classic definition that comes from academia that has actually been studying this for the last 15 odd years, where it talks about data spaces are not a data integration approach in the traditional way of looking at it, but rather a data coexistence approach. How do you make data live together and coexist together? And how do you support that? And from this perspective, it's all about trying to provide base functionality that allows data to work together regardless of the level of integration that they have. And this is a very abstract, we'll say, way of looking at it, but really looking at it from a data management point of view from academics. Within BDVA, we have an industry focus on this. So this was our position paper from last year towards European governed data sharing spaces, unlocking the potential for data exchange. And what we talk about here is actually a much broader concept than just looking at the technology. We're looking at that ecosystem of tools and models that exist, the data sets, the ontologies, the data sharing contracts, the specialist services that you have in place, but also critically, looking at the individual, looking at the organizations, and looking at the soft competencies that are required around that. So things like governance, things like the social interactions that can happen around the data, critically business processes and things like business models. And that really has motivated the work within BDVA in the area of data spaces and developing our data sharing wheel that looks at the challenges that we have around governance, around people, organizations, technology, data, and trust. What we see here is that this is not just a technology challenge that we have, it's a business challenge, it's an organizational challenge, it's a trust challenge. And this has really been the motivation for BDVA, and it's also the motivation as well for the Data Space Business Alliance as well, because what we're looking to do there is to try to provide a framework that helps us all understand the challenges that exist with data spaces, that helps us understand with things like common definitions, a common framework that we can all look towards and understand what the use and the value of data spaces are to individuals, to organizations, to groups of companies. And this is of critical importance because if we can bring together all of the stakeholders in Europe to be able to define this and to be able to work towards a common goal, we can actually start to realize the potential that come from data spaces and the opportunity that they present to us at both that large scale as a European-wide infrastructure, but also on that individual scale for the individual companies themselves, for small companies, for small groups of SMEs that want to work together, and also for individual people when they want to share their data and understand how it's been used. And with that, I think that's my last slide, and I will pass over, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. Indeed, BDVA has a leading role and a very crucial role in aligning all stakeholders in Europe and working together to further realize the potential of data spaces. So I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. So in this session, we explore many different angles of data spaces. So our next speaker is Aleš Versic from the Ministry of Public Administration of Slovenia and project manager at Open Data Hub Slovenia. Aleš will share with us the member state view, as well as more information about the European legislation that supports digital transformation. Aleš, the floor is yours.
Alexander, thank you, and hello to everybody joining us to this panel. I will try to show you some angle with legislation, which is supporting the digital transformation and member state view on all this legislation. So maybe in the beginning, I would just like to show the variety of the legislation, which is now already implemented or is running in the Europe, and also which is in the process of being accepted. So maybe I will start with, let's say, the oldest one. It's Open Data Directive, which opened the data of public sector, and also enabling all the countries to do that, so in the similar way. And the next with similar approach was Inspire Directive, also enabling to open the data of the public sector, and also in both we are talking about the non-personal data. And the Inspire Directive was focusing on spatial data, which is, let's say, also it's from the technical point of view a little bit more complex with the data structure and so on. And also, as we know, we have the GDPR. Sometimes people say this is like some obstacles, but I think the GDPR set us a quite good umbrella to protect our personal data. And we can also see that GDPR is now have influence also global, not just in the Europe. So I think the role of the Europe regarding to the regulation with some acts and directive could take a role in the digital world, because we have now, let's say, two extreme ways. It's one is some say China way with a full state control, or the other one is Silicon way, where you have the private companies more or less all the necessary data and dealing with especially for personal data. So then is another legislation, free flow of non-personal data, which is enabling exchange data across the Europe and other countries. Then the latest one, which will be now in the process, and I must say, in Tuesday, the colleagues from the Slovenian presidency in the European Union, they finalized the second political trilogue about Data Governance Act, which will set up some very important rules in the Europe, especially regarding to the private sector. And they finalized this trilogue successfully. So the next step about the Data Governance Act will be to finish the process in the European Parliament and publish to the public gazette. So hopefully in the beginning of the next year, this Data Governance Act will be fully implemented and can be used for that. And another one is Data Act, which is now in the preparation phase, and by the information from the European Commission, it will be the first draft will be published in the beginning of the next year. I think they say in the first quarter of the year. And also we have Digital Market Act. So this is all legislation which are regulate the field of data. And data, if you're talking about data spaces, of course, it's something that is essential to have it. And with that, we have, let's say, prepared all the necessary legislation to enable us to exchange the data and so on. Maybe just to say about the Data Governance Act, because this will help, and this is complementary to the Open Data Directive, it will enable to more open the protected data from the public sector, and we will need to establish the infrastructure for that, to have the access to the secure environment. And the chapter 3 in the DJ is regarding exchange data between companies. It's business to business and citizen to business. establish the data intermediary who can be helping to these companies to exchange data between them. And we have also data altruism, chapter 4, enabling to share the private data. And also what is important and will be helpful for the ecosystem, it's a European Innovation Board, which will be established, Data Innovation Board, to be established, help to the Commission and others how to exchange and set up some rules and some specification about how to implement this DJ and other issues. And what is, I would say, member state view or Slovenian view is our experience with Inspire Directive is a good practice how to enabling exchange the data between the countries in the Europe, because under Inspire Directive they prepare some data specification for the I would say technical point, how should be the data structure, how could we ensure the interoperability of the data sets. And this is for my it's quite good to practice, and I think could be used in the data spaces. Also, it should be very important to implement the relevant EU legislation as soon as possible, and also improve it during the time of using this regulation. Also, I think it's important for the what should the government do is to promote the EU legislation to help the private companies to understand the different legislation, because we have a lot of different legislation as you've seen before. And of course, we should support the collaboration and partnership. And this is quite important issue because if you want to make some improvement and create new knowledge and better services, it should be done by collaboration and partnership. And what is also important is to coordinate this creation of data spaces. It should be top-down approach, because if each country starts to create their own data space for different areas, then it could not be interoperable in the European level. So this, from governmental side, it's important to have coordinated in the European level. And also because we are now talking a lot of data and exchange also personal data, business data. It's also important not to forget on the ethics, because with more exchange of the data in digital society, we should also create the ethics regarding the data and the usage of data, because this is quite new issue for us. And I think that will be all from our side. So I hope I show you what kind of the legislation is now in place or will be in place, and what was expecting us from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aleš. Indeed, diverging legal and ethical frameworks impede the adoption of novel technologies. In BDVA, we are working together to implement technical solutions while also upholding our European values. So now let's travel from Slovenia to Germany. And our next speaker is Daniel Zenf. Daniel is Deputy Secretary General at Platform Industrie 4.0 in Germany. Daniel will share with us the overview about data spaces within this framework. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Usual mistake, I have to forgot to switch on my mic. So I hope you can see now my presentation. So
yes.
Perfect. So what I would like to come back to add in the wheel of the data space. So I think what we all tackle about is how we implement the data spaces and how we lay the foundations of these data spaces. And this is what we have done in Germany in the Platform Industrie 4.0 for the last years. along the vertical of manufacturing, of industry here in Germany. And in the recent discussions here in this network, which spans hundreds of organizations in Germany, from industry, from private partners, from governmental partners, I think we have achieved already a very common ground, a good understanding of the main pillars of what should be the basic design principles of such data spaces. And for sure, this is nothing new for you. I think it is three main pillars besides all technical issues which we all agree on. First, this is we have to ensure the independency of individual business and business makers, business decisions. We have to keep control about our data usage. This is what we frequently call as digital sovereignty or democratic or the democracy of data spaces. The second really fundamental requirement is interoperability. We have to design, whatever we do, we have to design the basic foundations in such a way that each partner of a data space is able to share data. He's able to share data and to communicate with other partners just by design, independently of any use case, of any specific application. We have to find a way to switch between use cases, to switch between different data spaces, at least within one vertical, but better in a horizontal way between the data spaces in different sectors. So this is we call interoperability by design. And last but not least, I think we all agree on this. We have to find a solution on this, because the way to a green economy is no doubt only the way with digital transparency. Sustainability and specifically a circular economy comes only with digital transparency along the full value chain. And this is more or less what we in the platform summarize what are the key design principles. We have to enable cross-company collaboration for multilateral data sharing, while at the same time maintain the business agility for all involved business partners in the digital production economy. So, and we, along these pillars, we today have already quite a good understanding of how these foundations should feel like. We kind of imagine the data space as a kind of underneath of a net or a coordination system, which comes along different dimensions, which we have to solve all together commonly on a unique basis, on which then individual solutions can be built on. And the dimensions of these network or these coordinate system span at least a technical issue, a technical dimension. They span other dimensions, as has been already mentioned, like legal issues, how we want to share data, is it legal, or how we want to set our compliance regulations between companies. We have to find a common ground on this, a common level playing field. And for sure, we somehow have to find a way to align the business models, at least if we want to act in corporate business models, spanning different partners of the value chain. So we have to find a way how to cooperate, or how to jointly make the value creation across different partners of these value partners. And more or less, it seems a bit like, as today we know many issues which are the ingredients to build these data spaces. And this slide should give you more or less a kind of overview where we are right now. So we have laid the foundations, and now we start to implement these foundations in a variety of different projects. It's not only one data space. I think we really test now different projects representing different use cases. We will learn a lot of these use cases, what is good with our concepts and where we have to improve these concepts, so that we will have competitive use cases, a competitive industry within these different domains. And in Germany, I think in a private-public approach, with a huge investment both from the governmental side and from the industry side, we start now creating these data spaces in two pivoting sectors. This is on the one hand side, the manufacturing sector, and on the other side, this is the automotive sector with a really lighthouse projects like Catena X, like software-defined manufacturing. And once I think we know, we have learned about the issues in these sectors, we will start the cross-industry transfer into other sectors, into other sectors, as for example, the chemistry industry, which more or less is ready to go along with us in this direction. So this is just a glimpse of what we do in Germany. I think the take-home message is we have led in cooperation with many different partners. Some of them you see here below. We have led the concepts, the basic foundations of data spaces, and now we start the implementation, just learning how these concepts feel in practice, what is good and where we have to improve our concepts so that we stay on a common ground. All these use cases can be built on so that we stay interoperable at the long term. So that's what basically the two sentences from Germany of how we foster the development of data spaces in the industry sector. And I really will be happy to join with you my thoughts in the following discussion. Thanks. Back to you, Alessandra.
Thank you, Daniel. Indeed, currently there are many data spaces projects ongoing that cover a vast range of industries in Europe. So, however, we have to use common standards and ideally not reinvent the wheel, because this will really accelerate access to market and exploitation of disruptive technologies, including data spaces. So let's proceed with our next speaker. So last but not least, I would like to invite Jean-François Casse, who is head of Data Space Business Committee of Gaia X. Jean-François will share the overview of data spaces activities of Gaia X.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Perfect.
And yes, very quickly, I will be after my excellent colleagues and the excellent talks we have had. I think a lot has been already said. So yes, I will talk about several things together. So first of all, I come from Amadeus, as you said, is one of the leading technology companies, software companies in Europe. And I'm not going to read all of this, but just what is interesting to see is Amadeus was created in Europe by the airline industry as a kind of central point for their data to favor a reservation system, to create a reservation system. So something like this was created in 87. So already some kind, and you can see some ideas of what could be a data space later. So in Gaia X, as such, in the association, there is a data space business committee together with the other two committees that are the technical committee in charge of the development of the technical solutions, and the policy rule committee that tries to set up the rules of engagement in cloud procurement. In the data space committee, we try to see and to monitor the main important parameters of data spaces existing in Europe, which is around their governance. It's been talked by my colleagues previously. Their finance and budget. How will they justify their cost and or their profit in case they want to do a profit? The fact of the rules of compliance, privacy, and security that they have to follow, and what are the technologies they are going to use. And we have already, and that's very optimistic view, but is a reality in Europe. We have all these verticals going on, energy, industry, etc., mobility, and so on. That shows the diversity already of what exists and what is actually being worked on. And myself with a team, so we work presently in EONA X, that is a mobility data space that actually focus around transport and mobility tourism in Europe. We have defined it as a non-profit organization, and I throw this a bit as a debate. Should a data space be a non-profit? Should it be a profit? That's something that still you might see different answers to this in what already has been created. We have delivered the first minimum viable product around seamless travel, and we want, of course, to be connected to other data spaces and to other countries. What really matters indeed is that data spaces have to bring a solution to problems that haven't been resolved previously. I will just finish by saying and compare with often the authorities, often the people from the European Union, as you have heard my colleagues before, or the countries' authorities, they will talk data spaces like the theoretical set of data around a given area. Or even somebody has been talking about a global European data space. Just to compare this, in my presentation, as you have seen, we call data space a set of companies that are trying to organize something together just to exchange their data. Just to mention that, because if not, it's difficult to follow these two uses of the term. That's for me, Alexandra, I think.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. And indeed, the goal and vision of PDVA is to further intensify the collaboration among all stakeholders in Europe, ranging from policymakers to leading organizations and companies to SMEs and startups. So now let's start with our Q&A session. We have received questions, so please feel free to continue to add your questions in the chat. Our first question matches very well the research interests and expertise of Edward. Edward, the question is for you, and it is, what is the relation between data spaces? Are there any contradictions, orthogonal or complementary? And if yes, why? Edward, are you with us? If you're muted.
Sure am. I had just an issue with my camera there. Hello.
Perfect. Yes, now it works. Is what is the relation between data spaces and semantic web? Are there contradictions? And if yes, why?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. So for people that aren't familiar, the semantic web was a vision from Tim Berners-Lee for the evolution of a web, from a web of documents to a web of data. It started around 2003, 2004, and it had this big vision of how do we use the web as a mechanism to exchange and share data. Fundamentally, it was a research project. It was built around technology like RDF, and over time, a set of best practices were identified for sharing data, which was called linked data. So I think these technologies are incredibly important when we want to implement data spaces and when we want to implement data spaces at scale. So I think they're incredibly complementary from a technical point of view. But when we look at what a data space is today, yes, there's a technical aspect to it, and it's very important. But these organizational, business, regulation aspects are also incredibly important to the definition as well. So it's a complementary implementation technology that can help us implement this. But the data space vision today is much larger than just the technology itself. It's a great question.
Thank you very much, Edward. Indeed. Our next question focuses on the dimension of big data, and namely, should we call data spaces as such, or rather big data spaces? And how does the big data paradigm fit to the data spaces?
Yeah, maybe I start, Alexandra, and hopefully I get some support from Ed and the others to this question. But nevertheless, the term big data, I think it was originally brought up, I think, from McKinsey, when I remember correctly, several years ago. And as you see, also the Big Data Value Association used the word big data also in the association name, but added value because we want to create impact. Yes, for sure, when you're speaking about data space, you have a huge amount of data, a big amount of data involved inside cross domains. Jean-Francois mentioned also the health link from his mobility data space, for example. So this is cross-topic. So you have anyway a big amount of data, which of course have to include several types of data. Also meaning I see not a contradiction to this. If we should say the word, maybe, but nevertheless, Ed, you will comment also more from the, as a professor, more from the side, more knowledgeable like I am about this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. For me, I see data spaces as being not so much about the amount of data that's in them. I think it's more about what we're going to use that data for. So really much on that value point. I think we'll have lots of data spaces. I don't think we'll have a single one, but we want to connect them. We want them to be federated so that the data can move between them. And that means that when we look at the visions that we have, the Commission is looking at this big picture vision where they're going to bring in very, very large data spaces for entire sectors. But you can also have very, very small data spaces for a local community that are trying to share data to improve the environmental impact of their neighborhood. So the scales will change. When it comes to big data, and the big data paradigm, what was key there is how do you leverage data to drive value and to drive innovation? And I think the data space will be a key source of that fuel. The fact that the data has been put into a format and in a way that makes it easy to share it and move it means it becomes easier to do big data, and also becomes easier to do data-driven AI as well. So I think the data space is that key foundation that we need, a key infrastructure that will help us do big data better and help us do data-driven AI better as well.
Thank you very much, Thomas and Ed. We have our next question from Matthias, and namely the question is, are we in Europe late with this deployment, given the fact that large companies have already outsourced important parts of their data processing to hyperscalers?
Okay, yeah, also good question. I think we aren't too late. It's always speed is of the essence, of course. And I know all the discussions about some companies that have used offers from big players like Volkswagen have made a contract with Amazon and Microsoft. But first of all, often these are only bilateral contracts and exchanges. And what we want to address with our data spaces concept is really opening up these data spaces for bigger amounts of players that interact with data and not only on a bilateral basis. And there we see much more potential than in the decision which solution provider one company will use for its own purposes. And the other thing is what I also quickly described in my presentation is that we see the shift from cloud-based approaches to edge-based approaches, where we think, of course, the hyperscalers address this, they won't miss their chance, but it's a shift in the way we manage data, and in this shift, we still see a lot of potential for European players to take up and make a better use of industrial data. So therefore, I think we are not too late, but we have to coordinate each other better than we have done it in the past.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Jean-Francois, would you like to add to that?
Yes, just to the two excellent last questions. Just to finish on the hyperscalers, this is not an issue. Again, data spaces is not that much a question of technology. It's much a question of sharing data, trust, and how you build a business on sharing. You may be on whatever hyperscaler you want, but the other companies around will be in other hyperscalers or maybe in the same one, and you still have to share the data. So I think we shouldn't confuse the fact that one thing is the cloud and so on, and the other thing is the data spaces. Now, it's true, and just finish with that maybe there is a more kind of American or Chinese vision that is more a cornerstone company, a company that can bring this sharing of data, but that's something else, is to build on top of the hyperscalers, or there is more European vision, which is the sharing of the data, the fact of the fact of putting links between companies, being in the cloud or not being in the cloud. On the big data question before, what is very interesting and what I can share from industry, what I see, is that of course data spaces are going to bring a lot of data, but more, as we see it, more at the partners of the data sharing. Is it? I see data spaces a bit like the plumbing of the data, the plumbing. So the data space, the data going from one place to the the other, and that will be used by the partners. One of the use they can do is to use big data technology at their side, but not in the data space itself, is what I mean. At their side to do the manipulation of the data. That was for me.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. I will also very kindly ask Matthias the question that we have: to what extent will the European Commission further encourage data sharing across sectors, and to what extent, what are the links to other initiatives like BBVA or Gaia X?
Okay, well, let's start with how we see this cross-sectoral data sharing. There, Jean-François already said he sees it more as a bottom-up approach where companies link each other and try to establish trust in sharing data. This is also our view on that we will start with this smaller what we call embryonic data spaces and see how they will really make use of this cross-company data sharing. And the cross-sectoral approaches, we see them for some specific topics already in the near future. So, for example, on regular topics like the digital product passport. I think this is a good topic to already think in the architecture of the individual data space for a group of companies or a sector, how they can easily support such regulatory topics. And then really in the long run, we want to see integrated cross-sectoral data space. And there also the question is if we then talk about one data space or is this still a couple of data spaces that are integrated? I think that's a definitely question, but it's important to start small, to already in the beginning see where the links to the others are, and then grow step by step. That's how we would support it. And if you then want to ask me about links to other initiatives, of course, we see a close link to Gaia, and we're very happy that Gaia already had this Data Spaces Business Committee and is now also part of the Data Spaces Business Alliance, because we need these stakeholder fora where they agree on ways to share data that we then can support with our money in their growth phase. That's how we see it. And also with the other national initiatives, it's I think our role to set the framework and then to see how the different bottom-up approaches integrate into that framework.
Thank you, Matthias. Our next question from the public focuses on semantic technologies. The question is, are semantics currently playing an important role in the data spaces, and will they continue to do so in the future? Edward, would you like to address the question? This, oh.
Sure. So for me, I think this is one of the hard challenges in computer science is data integration, and the reason for that is because people have different conceptualizations of the world, and even different communities have different conceptualizations of the world. When we look at semantics, language becomes really important. And within Europe, we have different, we'll say to North America, we have a lot of different languages, a lot of different ways of defining and describing data. So I think semantics will become increasingly important within data spaces and potentially becomes an area of competitive advantage for us in Europe, as well as we look to how we can use technologies to be able to do computational semantics and to try to automate the process more and more of data integration. Now, I know we've got a lot of industry colleagues in the call now, and they're going to probably talk a little bit about standardization and the opportunities that happen in those initiatives. And I think that's the immediate next step. And what I'm on about is more research vision, we'll say down the line, where we can also get value in more the medium to long term as well. But I think maybe Thomas, I can see that the nodding head there as well, and a few other colleagues might want to jump in on this one.
Maybe I jump on this one. You announced me coming from the bottom with the use case which I presented before. I now coming again from the bottom, let's phrase. But we know it since years. And to be honest, yes, the semantic or the description of machines or things is a real a huge target, and also what Ed said with a perspective, with a computational topics which we just erased before. In several industry association, I have to say, and also in companies, we have how we can describe, let's phrase it, the things or the assets. The things must not only be a physical thing, it can be also some kind of topics. How is the behavior, how is the semantic of the things. Is a lot of ongoing in industry association, also close to standardization topics, as you are absolutely right. Here we have the OPC-UA topic and the companion spec to describe the drive and robot and machine, don't ask them what, and visioning system to understand what the visioning system is, or the machine or the drive is to behave. This is a huge ongoing initiative close to the standardization body. We are well aware that there's something down the road. There's also on the W3C with the Web of Things topics, where also some kind of initiatives ongoing. As a meaning, coming back to the question regarding is this a relevance for data spaces? Yes. Is this discussed deeply enough? Maybe not. Is this topic addressed widely? Yes, I have given some. Is this like described before with the example? Is this discussed widely enough? Maybe not. I think we are well aware that this have to be solved. And to be honest, and Matthias mentioned also before, and sorry when I add on and to a part what Matthias mentioned regarding the Data Space Business Alliance, and I will conclude also with the semantic topic and with the industry association, what I have said before. I think in the Data Space Business Alliance, we had put together in, let's phrase it in my words, a hands-on approach, different initiatives to discuss, to synchronize its other, to use, let's say, Ed have shown the data wheel before, which is for example, one topic, which is perfectly you can use from other initiatives too, but really to bring together the different initiatives from BDVA, from Gaia X, from IDSA, from Fiverr and others, because this will be open to synchronize our messages, because when we're not doing this together, then we have a topic, because we have to cover, let's say, the data infrastructure, the data spaces, the data value, but the applications of in different verticals, and of course, to address these all questions regarding the semantics. And that's the reason why we are setting this up really in a hands-on approach. I have to tell you that we are synchronizing this up, because at the end, we will have to create impact for all of us to improve businesses or to have something for the society. That's only to conclude on this topic.
Thank you, Thomas. Daniel?
Just a reaction coming back to you at I fully agree that in Europe we have the situation that we have many different colors of flavors of language, of semantics, and I want to ask you,
Seems like we lost Daniel. Alish, I see you raising your hands.
Yes, I just maybe my view also on the semantics. I would say it's not just important in the data spaces. Because, okay, we can say data space is umbrella overall, but I think the semantics is also important in the everyday life when you discuss with the people from the different culture areas, or if you have I don't know, data from the different countries, you want to join them in some service, it's very important to have this semantics well done. Otherwise, you will have a lot of work to do to combine this kind of data to create some service. So I think I would say the semantics is, if we are talking about the data, it's crucial, especially if you try to combine the field of big data. Yes, of course, it's very important to have these semantics already done and to be implemented. So yeah, this is let's say, of course, my view of that.
Thank you, Alice. And we have a question also regarding the role of the member states, and namely, how can member states support creating business opportunities that also benefit citizens?
Yeah, thank you. Also, good question. Yeah, the role of government, of course, is to prepare the environment for the business company, private companies, to have some predictable environment or the area to work on. And we have also experience in Slovenia, but I think this is the same problem also in the other countries. If we are talking about public sector data sharing for the companies to create some services, especially open data, the problem is the stability of the data. So if you are using the data from the government and then somebody just decided to change the data structure, then you are, as a private company, have a lot of work to see what was changed and have a problem. So I think the governmental role is to have the stable environment and prepare all the legislation and to have the fair play for everybody who is dealing with data in the country and also in the Europe. And also in this environment, also the citizens will have the benefit because they will have a better services, also could have maybe easier access to the data because somebody could also create some app or services using on the governmental data, so more transparent to the society and create some new knowledge could be also a benefit for the citizens. Maybe not direct impact to the citizen, but through the services and all other stuff that private companies doing, the citizens will have also a benefit, and also the government because they will have happy citizens. So.
Indeed, that's how it goes. Anil, you're back. Would you like to continue?
So whatever happened, yeah. My impression is, so in Europe, we can take it as a strength that we have many different languages, and when we know these languages, so in the business language, we are well aware that we have these issues, and we started to form our, let's say, our standards in our particular data spaces. And this is my impression in the last years, be it in the digital twin communities or in what we call administration shell. We made our standards set up and we found our semantics. And this is what we have as strengths in Europe compared to other countries of the world or other regions. And this is coming back to it. It sounded a bit negative. At least I got the impression that we have these variety of common languages in Europe. I see it a bit different, and I just wanted to go back to you.
Sure. So there's two things there. One is the I think for with the variety of languages, I think that's an opportunity for us. I don't see it as a negative. But I'm a computer scientist, so I'm always looking at the things that we can't solve. And the way I look at it from a data point of view, in particular on standardization, if you look at what standards are, we need to get a group of people to come together to agree on terms, on concepts. Typically, they take time because, building consensus takes time. It's a long effort. You need to have an identified community. You need to have an identified process. But when it works, it's magic. It's pure magic. We are now talking today across the internet based purely on standards. It's pure magic. However, the challenge that we have in the world is that we're creating more and more data than we've ever had before. Ever since I would say that the start of computer science as a field, we've always had more data than we can manage. It's always been the case. We're in a constant battle as computer scientists, as data management professionals, to be able to manage this quantity of data that's been generated. We've never managed to be able to say, yes, today we as humans can control all the data that we create. We have the standards over them. So with that perspective, we do need to look at different approaches to how we try to manage that large scale of data that's been created that isn't standardized today and may not be standardized for the next 5 or 6 years. And I think that's where there's opportunities as well for things like computational semantics and leveraging techniques for AI to be able to manage data. And I think in Europe, we have strengths in that as well that we can bring to the table to look at new techniques to do that. And again, this is from a research perspective, a computer science perspective on that.
Thank you, Daniel and Edward. Indeed, this richness at European level brings a lot of opportunity and challenges. Let's discuss more about the business uptake and market uptake of these technologies. And namely, I would like to ask Jean-Francois, from a company perspective, what are your expectations, requirements for data space to create business impact?
Yes, so thank you so much, because that's the key. What is the expectations? What we need to create, if it works, because it's still conditional, by the way. It's something that brings value in a context where the novelty is the fact of creating value together. I just share my experience, which is normal, that when you try to combine several companies to create a common platform, all of them, big companies, I would say, not small ones, but if you try to combine big companies together, all of them actually have got a team working to be the platform of the place. So actually, the fact is that you are trying to create something that is new, because it's the fact that everybody recognizes that alone, that together it gets better than alone, which actually there is always a huge resistance in any organization to this statement, which just seems very simple, but it's complicated. And how you demonstrate this common value, because you have, first of all, to invest. And let's be honest here, somebody has to start putting money, and between private actors, it will be always why the other doesn't start before, and so on. So I think there is this notion very important to start, to create a common good. And so there is a need, it's true, somehow, of our public funding. I am very pleased also by the fact that European Commission, what has been said by Matthias Krom, I think very important that the European Commission is starting as well with the new projects, because today the funding has been very national, and you find yourself with groups that even if you try, it's very difficult to come out of the national context, because the move and up to now, if you take out the fact that was, of course, at the source of it, very important, the data strategy of the European Commission, the definition of the verticals, the 19th, but still, in the last couple of years, the focus has been very national, and you find yourself that a lot of the initiatives are actually amazingly national, and find it very difficult to be cross-border. So I will say that this is the two big challenges at the time. First of all, a fact of coming out to create a common good between different companies, and secondly, this notion of being able to be cross-border. That's for me. I hope I answered.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. Thomas, would you add the topic?
Yeah, maybe I add also from the business perspective, data, use of data, to get value out of data, and knowing that up to now, don't ask me, I'm not a fan of a big statistic, but only maybe around 20% of the available data are used in certain domains, maybe 25, maybe 15, I don't care, less, let's say, because we have to solve a lot of questions, to be honest. This is also the reason behind this, like we're discussing. But to use this data on the one side, to improve existing businesses, processes, that's good that we are on the way. So a lot of topics are ongoing, a lot of research project, for example, some project with Boost 4.0, where we're thinking about how we can optimize with AI, with usage of data, and to increase the quality and reduce the downtime from system. But, and now is an important part, we have also to look what are new business opportunities. And this is what are the new business models. And this is really, well, let's say, this is some across different providers or users of data. What is, I like also the word, I think Daniel mentions this, the democracy, I think, can use this for this. And this is really where we have to look at it. What are the new opportunities? And of course, we need to achieve this new opportunity, we need also the basic, or the basic is wrong, it's not basic, it's a basic basis for this, for what we're doing. So that's only my 2 comments to this.
Thank you, Thomas. Flavio, please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question that goes basically along the lines of the question that Jean-Francois asked in his introduction, when he said, okay, should data spaces be non-profit or for-profit? So behind this, it's the thinking. So what would drive the innovation, right? On the other side, we also have all this legislation that is coming up, like the DGA, where we have the definition of data intermediaries, which should be separate legal persons. We have data altruism defined, fair conditions for sharing or selling data. So there is some. My feeling is that there is some wish from the Commission that's proposing the legislation in the member states to somehow regulate this and put some rules on the market. So maybe Thomas and Jean-Francois, how you see this? Is this something that is going to help find the right business models that would be fair and profitable, or is something that is hampering the development?
Yes, Thomas. No, whatever.
You first.
Thank you. No, I think.
I'm happy to first hear the business perspective, and then hopefully.
So Flavio, I think the questions are very key, and after years of working in this is still to be resolved. I always employ an image. Do we want the data spaces to be like the secondary road system in our countries that is paid by the taxpayer to foster the business of an area, or do we want it to be the highway toll system that is managed by a consortium in exchange of profit? Call it Vinci or whatever. You have the two perspectives, and of course the two doesn't bring exactly the same benefits. I'm speaking from a French perspective. So if you take a highway in France, you will see excellent quality on the road. You will pay a lot when you go through the toll, but you have a lot of services in it, and is how it is. If you go to a secondary road, maybe the quality of the road is less important. Your speed is lower. But you don't pay for the use on the spot, but you pay tax to finance the spot. And data spaces, I think there is a real question here. And we see, by the way, the reality of data spaces today, we see this mix of creations that are around. Practically, industry is using either a non-profit organization like associations type 1901 in France or in Germany, or you see GmbH or whatever, SAS in France for companies. So you see that the matter is not resolved. The industry is looking for it. I think as well there will be maybe levels. There is a first level of that could be non-profit, and a second level that could be profit. But it's an excellent question that we are all working on. Thomas, please.
I can confirm we are all working on this question. Joke, and I'm not speaking about the highways in France or Germany. That's an example. As a German driver, now I'm silent. No, but seriously spoken, Flavio, you mentioned also about regulation and business influence. Businesses who makes a business. Yeah, it's a business or business models are typical coming from us when you're looking to Jean-Francois representing with myself, let's say some industry, and we know that regulation can really push forward our businesses, also giving some kind of added value or competitive selling point also to outside of Europe. But we are also careful that us not influencing this. And now the thing is, and that's the reason, when you're speaking about Data Governance Act or the AI Act or something else, there's always an public consultation. And to the Commission include us and to get feedback, and our feedback is also recognized. I can tell you, at least I know this, and we find together and solution where we can all benefit from us. I'm very confident in this area, and to be honest, I was also some years ago regarding AI, trustworthy AI, and I said, when we make it in a clever way together, I added those words together meaning between the different stakeholders, Commission, companies, people like Ed coming from research, member states, and we make it in a clever way together. This is also for us as a company a competitive advantage. You see this with, for example, maybe in other topics where we have put in some regulation, which is now adapted also outside. This is my words. We have to work together on it and find an appropriate solution. And the good thing is, what the reality is, that we're working together on this. Let's phrase it in this way.
Yes,
Thank you, Thomas.
We're working together on this, and really happy to receive your views on that, and already discussed this with several of you. And it's not one model that will fit all purposes. It also depends on the topic, on the sector. It will be different maybe for health and mobility, which is more public good, and compared to manufacturing industry use cases, where we see our role to maybe enable a more level playing field fair approach. We don't think we need to support initiatives like Skywise, where we have one player that really pushes the other. That is not a bad thing. It's just a different approach. And what we do with the Data Governance Act, there we propose one model with the intermediary, and we don't say that you have to use this intermediary, but if you want to use such an intermediary, then we define how such an intermediary has to interact with the others, that it has to be neutral in terms of its business model to the data he intermediates with the others. And that's the idea of the Data Governance Act, where we are now a step further, because we now have a first agreement also with Council and Parliament, that our approach also from their point of view makes a lot of sense, and we see how we can develop this further.
Thank you, Matthias. For our attendees that are exploring further or want to explore data spaces as an industry domain, what would be the main challenges when creating a new data space? And why should we make the effort to do that? What is the innovation potential and outcome that we want to draw from this effort? Jean-François, would you like to be the first to address that?
Yeah, that's it. The amazing thing, and I fully agree. I mean, very good what you just say, Matthias Quom. For me, I see data spaces like this new tool where companies just share the data they want to share at the conditions they want to put on the market. And this is very essential, because it's a bit the opposite of what we call a data lake that tends to turn into a data swamp, because actually you put things together, but there is so much to deal with that nobody knows how to deal with this thing. So, but this will be the amazing innovation, because it means that there will be trust, because everybody keeps his data until he exchanges it, but for something, or just he agrees, she or he agrees to exchange for nothing. But at least there will be this notion that the data only goes on, either lended or either given, with some conditions to be defined, and just for that packet of data. For me, this is the big innovation. I don't know the others, if they share the vision.
I think Jean-François described this very holistic and complete.
Yeah, I think from it is a proof points we have to showcase. It's a benefit. So I think, Jean-François, you really mentioned it right. The idea of a data space is that companies start to jointly cooperate in joint business models where value creation is, it's the interconnection between, or is created, it's the interconnection between the companies, which is this is a new paradigm for many organizations. And highlighting, showcasing proof points which showcase that you can make profit of this and how you can deal with that. That should be the way forward.
And also understand better where really the value of data is, because often you know the cost you have to generate and share data, but what really the value is maybe also for others, not only for yourself. That's also an aspect that still needs some learnings, I think. And therefore, we need to have more of such examples where we can train us in better understand it.
Yeah, Matthias, you mentioned also this ecosystem where you have partner inside different partner, where you have the win-win for the different partner, the openness, the government structure, you know, the underlying data spaces and so on, which we are looking on this. And what we, and that's the reason why I started also with use case with Aspen, and maybe highlighted also it's a business case as a use case, because we want to have really impact. Now this was more from the industrial domain, like I mentioned before, but it's also for other domains and also for the society, that we are looking how the future ecosystems can look like, and how the future business models, and we orienting this on use cases, but exactly that we can discuss here in the round like we have today.
Alish?
Yes, also, let's say, member on governmental view. Yeah, of course, I would say the public sector already opened the data and sharing with all stakeholders for the private companies and others. And I think now it's also the time that also the companies who is holding the data, who was produced by citizens, to share between the companies or others the data on the conditions to create something new and better society. Because I think with a lot of the data we can gain a new knowledge, and with the new knowledge you can go to the next level. And I think in the digital society we are all producing the data. Currently now, during our discussion, we produced some amount of the data which could be used, I don't know, in some use cases. So I think this is the next level of the society. I would say a digital society. Thank you.
And maybe to add one comment, Alish, to your comment, you know, now I'm speaking a little bit more from the industrial domain, where we have also, and Daniel mentioned this also before, he spoke about the diversity, which is also an advantage for us, you know, the discussion regarding semantic, and we have also and we have also in the future some kind of diversity in the different industrial domains. You know, process industry is different to a discrete manufacturing, is different to a healthcare application. Only to make it, also there's some common topics, and where we have the domain knowledge here inside Europe, because a lot of our companies are world market leader, which we should keep and for sure build on the discussion what is possible with data, generally spoken. But we have also aware that in the data there's also some kind of knowledge included, where we are keen, because this knowledge is again reflected to our domain knowledge, can be used how we optimize a machine or don't they. This is exactly the balance where we have to have the, you know, this in GAIA is also how we can get the control, keeps the control over the data that they are not misused. And especially when this is not especially, but also when IPs or know-how is related to this data. And this is exactly where we are at the moment inside this balance. And Jean-François, I'm with you with the data lake comparison and so on. That's a little bit difficult. Put everything inside, making something and create something out. It could be a little bit difficult.
Thank you, Thomas. And indeed, we have many concurrent activities in Europe on this domain. Maybe we can close the session. We have 3 minutes remaining with a quick statement from every speaker on what would be the ideal way forward to team up on a European scale and build together globally competitive data spaces for the European industry.
So if I may start, for us it's important that we really integrate the different approaches. There was already mentioned from Jean-François, I think that we have very big national initiatives, and they are good, and we really like what's happening there, but it's really good to also make them more cross-border. That can be done with the support, for example, from the Digital Europe program. And then the picture with the swamp was really excellent. I think we have to better shape our use cases to avoid trapping into such swamps and really make a better use of the data. That's my thing.
Thank you, Matthias. have also our data spaces task force in BDVA that will be leading this effort and working that direction as well.
Maybe to add, yeah,
yes,
many. I think I make it a very, very direct. I think cooperation is keen between different stakeholders and between different topics, because it's a multi-dimensional topic which we have to solve it, which we can solve. I think the last sentence is an important one.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We will stay in contact for more synergies in the domain. And make sure to follow the next steps of BDVA and BDVF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Stay healthy and safe.